I was actually going to poll the room and see who here had actually heard of this thing called blockchain, but it happened for us, which was nice. And it's great that nobody here knows what it is, because for the first time, and we hope you'll remember this long into the future, you're going to hear about a technology that's likely to have a very profound impact on the world of business. And it's not the social web. Oh, clicker. It's not the social web, mobility, big data, machine learning, AI, autonomous vehicles, or any of these other really interesting technologies. It's the blockchain, which is the technology behind the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Blockchain. Okay, not the most sonorous word. Sounds kind of like a combination of blocking and tackling and chain gang. But sonorous or not, we think this technology holds the potential to have a profound impact on the old order of economic affairs and potentially to create a more fair and prosperous economy and a more fair and prosperous world. We also happen to think it's the second generation of the internet. So, when you use the internet today to send information like a Word document, a PDF, a PowerPoint, you're not sending an original, you're actually sending a copy. And that's a good thing. It means that information has become democratized. We have a printing press for certain kinds of information. So after this event, if I wanted to share this PowerPoint with all of you, I could send the same one 500 times. But when you're talking about assets, money, stocks, bonds, titles, deeds, music files, sending a copy is actually a bad idea. If I've got $100 and I give you $100, it's very important that you have the $100 and I don't still have it. If I could send the same $100 to the gentleman in the front row and every single person in this room, then that would be a bad thing. In fact, the global economy might collapse. So it's okay to have a printing press for information. It's very bad to have a printing press for money. Cryptographers have called this the double spend problem, and they've been trying to figure out a solution to it for 25 years. So today, we still have to rely on someone, anyone, to establish trust between two parties, to establish the identity of two parties in a transaction, and to perform the transaction logic. This cartoon ran in 1993. It reads, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Well, that actually turned out to be true, at least when it comes to transaction and commerce online. Establishing the identity of another party, an anonymous person that you're trying to do business with, is actually a really, really thorny problem. So today, we still rely on intermediaries to determine the identity of parties to a transaction, to establish trust, to perform the processing and the settling and the clearing of transactions, and to keep records of what has occurred. And these middlemen, some of them might be familiar to you, of course. You've got banks and credit card companies and other financial intermediaries, but also companies like Google and Apple and Uber sit in the middle of transactions and capture a lot of the value. Now, overall, these intermediaries do a pretty good job with some limitations. For one, they're all centralized, which creates points of failure. Any customer of JP Morgan, Home Depot, Target, Morgan Stanley, or an employee of the CIA or the State Department knows what happens and the risks that are prevalent when data is stored in a central location. It can be hacked. Second of all, they tax the entire system, which adds cost to the global economy. So for example, to send remittances on cross-border payments, it can cost up to 10%. They capture data, which they can then use for commercial exploitation, which also can undermine our privacy. They're exclusionary. 2.5 billion people in the world don't have access to financial services. In some, they capture a lopsided benefit of the commerce that happens online and offline. What if there were an internet of value? Not an internet of information, but an internet of value. A new distributed platform that enabled us to transact and do business without knowing or trusting one another and without the need for a central intermediary. Well, in 2008, the global financial system crashed. Perhaps propitiously, an anonymous programmer or group of programmers named Satoshi Nakamoto outlined the framework for an electronic cash based on a cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. This protocol established a set of rules that enabled us to move value online in a native digital format from peer to peer without the need for a central party. This seemingly subtle act has set off a spark that has spread like wildfire through the world of computing, financial services, media, and increasingly many other businesses. So Bitcoin, one of those words I'm sure you've also heard before, and you may have mixed notions of what exactly it is. So let me break it down. Bitcoin is an asset. Like gold, it goes up, it goes down, you can buy it, you can sell it, you can trade it, you can make money on it. That's kind of interesting if you're a speculator. Kind of like a stock or a bond might be interesting as a speculator. More interestingly, it's a cryptocurrency not issued by a nation state and native to the internet. That's much more interesting for a lot of use cases. For example, in the cross-border remittance world, $600 billion of money flows across borders every year. If you could use a cryptocurrency to move money from, say, here to the Philippines or India or China, then you might be able to save on 10%. That's a big difference, especially for the people, the most marginalized people in the world who actually send these remittance payments. But most interestingly is it's based on a technology called blockchain. So for the first time in human history, two or more parties need not know nor trust one another to transact or do business. A central party doesn't establish trust. A distributed network of participants does it instead. Trust is hard-coded into the platform, which is why we call blockchain the trust protocol. Taken one step further, it takes all the transaction logic and the business logic, the clearing and the settling and the processing from the intermediary into the network, into the financial cloud. And as a result, can become a new platform, not only for us to do transactions, but to organize capability and to conduct our affairs. So how does all this stuff work? Well, it starts with a distributed ledger, a database running on millions of computers around the world backed up by heavy-duty cryptography, not stored on any single source. Transactions are happening constantly in the network, and a community of validators are committing large amounts of computing resources to prove whether or not something happened, and they do that by reaching consensus. And in exchange for reaching consensus, they're rewarded, in the case of Bitcoin, with digital money. Every so often, like the heartbeat of the network, transactions are batched into these things called blocks. These blocks are added to a blockchain, which therefore must reference the previous blocks. So in order to hack a transaction in one block, you couldn't just rewrite one transaction. You'd have to rewrite the entire history of commerce on that blockchain to the beginning of time, do it in the broad daylight of the largest computing resource in the world, at some estimates 20 times the size of Google's entire server farm, and do it in a 10-minute period. That's practically impossible, and some estimates suggest that the energy needed to do that would be more energy than exists in the entire sun. And finally, the blocks are time-stamped, so they become an indelible record that exists from now until the history of time on that blockchain and can't be altered. And this has profound implications for a wide variety of industries. And to be sure, financial services is one of the first and most significant areas where blockchain is going to have an impact. If anybody's familiar with this graphic, this is what they call a Rube Goldberg machine, which is a very complex contraption which performs a very simple task. And a lot of the financial services industry actually kind of looks like this when you dig in behind the scenes. So if you go to Starbucks and tap your credit card on a card reader, the transaction might seem seamless, but what happens is the value travels through a Byzantine system of intermediaries, takes days to settle, sometimes goes through computer systems, mainframe computers that exist in processing transaction centers that run on 1970s mainframes. And in the end, it ends up taxing the system, it slows it down, makes it sometimes unreliable. And it turns out that payments is one of 8 different areas of the financial services industry that will be profoundly impacted by blockchain. We decided to really dig into the industry and to understand what exactly does the financial services industry do in business and society. And it turns out it does 8 things. Now, I won't get into all 8, but you can see from each of these different areas that that basically covers off what the industry does. So we talked about moving value. What about, say, lending value? So today we rely on banks to extend credit. A lot of people can't get access to banks to begin with, so they have no ability to even access the basics. With blockchain, you can create peer-to-peer lending platforms where individuals can use identities which are verified by their past transaction history, which, as we know, is a perfect indelible record of what they have done, to get access to credit in a peer-to-peer fashion without the need for intermediaries. And in each of these different areas, there are a dozen or more opportunities to completely reinvent the financial services industry. We call it the trust protocol. The Economist calls it the trust machine. This is a cover story that ran in The Economist in October. They call it the chain of being sure about things, and said it wasn't exactly a sexy technology, but it could prove to be as important or as profound for the global economy as things like double entry accounting or the joint stock corporation. Two inventions, by the way, which were instrumental in the modern global capitalist economy that we know so well. And given the potential of blockchain technology, it's no small wonder why a lot of executives at big firms, not just in banking, but increasingly in manufacturing, in media, in logistics, in the technology arena, are trying to better understand what the heck all this stuff is all about. So this is a perfect kind of example of what might happen between an engineer and an executive. I think we should build a blockchain, says the executive. Dilbert, uh-oh. Does he know what he's talking about, or is it just something he saw in a trade magazine ad? Well, what color would you like your blockchain? I think mauve has the most RAM. And then I'm sure he walks away self-satisfied about his answer. So there's a lot of confusion about what the opportunities are. And I think there's no better person to talk about how blockchain will impact both business, society, and our institutions than my dad, Don Tapscott, who's been spending 30 years talking about how technology will change everything. And it's my pleasure to introduce him to the stage right now. Don.
Do you think mauve has the most RAM? This is a pretty exciting day for us. You people are the first people in the United States of America, or globally, to get a copy of this book. The ink is still wet, and the book comes out on May the 10th. It's already the best-selling book on banking in the world, even though it hasn't come out yet. Don't ask me, just based on pre-orders alone. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm at D Tapscott on Twitter. Alex is at Alex Tapscott on Twitter. Do let us know what you think about it. But more important, the best way to get this book is in massive volume. Christmas, coming soon. I know DLD, you people have friends. No, seriously. Let me explain, that was a masterful explanation of what this is all about. And it's tough, you know? Back in the day, I mean, I wrote the first bestseller about the web in business. It was called The Digital Economy. It wasn't hard to explain. All the computers in the world interconnect. You put some stuff on your computer, and through a thing called a unique resource locator, other people can see it. Any questions? Alex took 15 minutes to be able to explain that, but I hope you understand it. Let me talk to you about why this matters. And I'm going to pick up on just one chapter from the book. When I wrote The Digital Economy, I said this is an age of vast new opportunity. You see, because this new medium, the internet, it's distributed, unlike old media that's centralized one way, one size fits all, controlled by powerful forces, and everyone is inert and passive as a recipient. This new media is the antithesis of that. It's distributed. It's one-to-one. It's many-to-many. It has this awesome neutrality. It will be what we want it to be. And 20 years later, I was asked to do an update to the book, and I wrote a dozen new mini chapters. And I had to go back and reflect on what has occurred. And sure, lots of good things have happened in the last 20 years, but when you look at the key measures of social progress, prosperity being the biggest one. For the first time in modern history, prosperity in the developed world is declining. The 51st percentile has been going up for a century, and now it's falling. Social inequalities become the biggest public policy issue, and it's true about the 1%. The digital age has been captured, and the benefits are asymmetrical. What if, as Alex said, we had not just an internet of information that could be captured by powerful forces, but an internet of value that was truly peer-to-peer and enabled people to communicate value, to create value, to protect value in a peer-to-peer basis. Could that give us another kick at the can? Well, once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle. Summoned by an unknown person or persons, it's now at our disposal. And we have another shot at this. That's the significance. And one of the things that we believe from our research and from talking to everybody and all the case studies that we did is that this can enable us to solve this prosperity paradox, that we have all this miraculous technology, but prosperity is declining. How so? Well, 7 ways. First of all, we can include billions of people in the global economy. Do you know that there are between 2 and 3 billion people today who have a mobile device connected to a network, but they don't have a bank account because that mobile device, some shoes, some clothes, a pig, and a couple of chickens is all that they own. Well, those people can now be brought in to the global economy. And we know that this is possible because we have things like M-Pesa in Kenya. 13% of all transactions go through M-Pesa, and that's a baby, limited little capability compared to the vast potential of the blockchain. And there's no bank involved. This is all money moving around. In the case of M-Pesa, through a central server, it's a big problem, but it can move around in a distributed platform, bringing people into the economy, letting them borrow money, save money, sell stuff, do transactions. Wow. On that count alone, this is a big deal. Number 2, protecting rights through immutable records. Do you know that 70% of the people in the world who own land have a flaky title? So you're a little farmer in Honduras, and a dictator comes to power, it's a true story, and he says, I know you got a piece of paper saying you own your little piece of land, but our government computer system says my friend owns your land. And this ended up being practically a revolution in Honduras over this. Well, now in Honduras, that's one of a number of countries through companies like Factum or Bitfury where titles are being placed on the blockchain. Because what we have is a distributed ledger, a database, kind of like a global spreadsheet. And once you put that land title on the blockchain, you can't really mess with it unless you have more energy than exists in the sun. And that's more energy than most people have at their disposal to hack a network. So imagine, if you don't have an immutable title to your land, you can't borrow against it, you can't you can't participate fully in the economy. That problem can be solved. Then we have the sharing economy. I laugh. People call Uber a sharing economy company. Our research on what is sharing comes from preschoolers. You ask a 4-year-old, if I give you one of my cookies, is that sharing? And they'll say, yeah, that's sharing. If I give you a cookie, but you got to give me a pencil, is that sharing? No, that's mean. 4-year-olds know what sharing is. And Uber is not a sharing economy company. It's a $65 billion corporation that aggregates services and excess capacity, as is Airbnb and Lyft and TaskRabbit and all the rest. Well, what if we had a distributed ledger that enabled a whole bunch of smart agents and smart contracts to create the functionality of Uber. Well, in the book we call it super Uber. And we go through in take great depths to explain how all of this would work. This is not some pipe dream. There are companies that are developing the equivalent of Uber right now. You see, when you look at the device and you see a bunch of cars and you order something and it goes up onto a cloud, a platform, and these transactions occur and money, that's all just software. Smart agents can do that on a blockchain. So that means that the drivers could truly share in the value that they create, as could the owners of Airbnb properties. Annalie Domingo is a housekeeper and nanny who lives in Toronto. And for 22 years, she's been going to the local Western Union office to pay her remittances. Alex mentioned this. Do you know that the biggest flow of funds from the developed world to the developing world is not foreign aid, it's not direct capital investment by corporations, it's people from diasporas giving money back to their family and their ancestral lands. Annalie Domingo took 5 hours to do this every month. It's time off work. She got charged roughly 11%, and it took 4 to 7 days, and her mom never knew when the money was going to arrive. 5 months ago, Annalie Domingo, using a tool called Abra, from her mobile device, typed in 200, the equivalent of $200, and that money didn't take 4 to 7 days to get to her mom. It took a millisecond. And then her mom has a mobile device that has, kind of like Uber drivers, and Abra tellers moving around. There's a 5-star teller. He's 6 minutes away. She hits on this guy. He's got a great reputation. He shows up. She does a transaction to him, and he gives her physical Filipino pesos. Total cost under 1% rather than 11%. That's a $500 billion business right there. How about enabling all of us to own, monetize, and use our data? This is one of the weirdest things about the first generation of the internet, is we create all this data, arguably a new asset class, maybe more important than previous asset classes like land under the agrarian economy, or physical plant in the industrial age, or even money. This huge asset that's created by us, but we don't own it. We don't get to use it. Not only that, we can't monetize it, and often it's used against us, fundamentally undermining our privacy. Everybody knows governments are creating a surveillance society, and corporations use this information for all kinds of reasons, some of them which are injurious to us. What if each of us had our personal avatar? I'm sorry, what's your first name? Elka. Right now, Elka has the virtual Elka, and it's out there. It knows more about Elka than Elka does. Now, it's owned by Google and Facebook and big social media companies, and by your bank and by your government. What if Elka owned the virtual Elka? It was an avatar that moved around with her, and it collected data as she created it, and it only gave away that shred of information necessary to participate in the economy and society. For example, in a transaction. You know, a lot of transactions, you don't even need to know who the other party is. You just need to get paid. Remember cash? You would pay for something with cash. The two parties didn't know who they were necessarily, but the two parties were satisfied. So we can move back to some of the benefits of the physical world. Back, even today in the physical world, you get stopped by a policeman, you give them your driver's license, right? Identity is disaggregated. You don't give them your frequent flyer point or your credit card. Well, in some countries, maybe you do give your credit card. But we can now move to a new environment where the virtual Don is owned by me. It collects data, and I can decide if I want to monetize it or if I'm going to use it. Number 6, because of blockchains, we can move into halcyon days of entrepreneurship. Now, the bottom line here of all of this, in case it's not clear, is rather than the redistribution of wealth to solve the problem of social inequality, we can pre-distribute wealth. We can change the way that wealth gets created in the first place by democratizing it. So consider Ronald Coase. I wrote about him in The Digital Economy almost 25 years ago now. And I said, he holds the key to understanding the impact of the digital age on the corporation. And he argued that we have firms that are big and vertically integrated because the costs of transactions in an open market are greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of a corporation. Well, IT in the early days in the 70s started to change that. With the first internet, transaction and collaboration costs started to drop, and companies like Cisco figured that out. They unbundled into networks, and a business model conferred a competitive advantage to them. But now with blockchain technology, whoops, there's a typo, we can have peer-to-peer, this is the problem the first time you give a presentation, you have peer-to-peer value creation, where little companies can have all the capability of big companies without the main liabilities, deadening bureaucracy, legacy cultures and systems, and so on. So talent, we think, is inside our boundaries. Your most precious asset goes out the elevator every night. No. Talent can now be outside of our boundaries. This is an historic change to the deep architecture and structure of the firm, of how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services, to create public value, to engage with the rest of the world. And the final one is, by the way, in the book you'll read 7 different blockchain business models that we think are applicable to any business that will shake the windows and rattle the walls of many firms. The big disruptors are about to be disrupted. And the final one is what we call the enterprise collaborators. You know these companies that are essentially creating industrial strength? What happened there? Government for the people and by the people. Yeah. We have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Need I say more? And more in the 28 OECD countries, with one exception, Canada, the last elections, voting amongst young people has been declining for almost 15 years. More and more young people agree with the bumper sticker, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." How are we going to solve this? Well, in the United States, politicians are beholden to vested interests, big money. And what if politicians got elected with smart contracts that said funds don't flow for you or for government programs unless you deliver what you said you would do for the citizens, not for the big lobbyists and bankers and funders that bankrolled your campaign? So I think we could move into a new era of democracy, which is characterized by a culture of public deliberation, active citizenship, extraordinary transparency, and sunlight is the best disinfectant, and government representatives that are accountable to the population. And you'll read about that in the book as well. So this is a new paradigm. It feels to me like 1993. You know, I used to say, who's heard about the internet? 10% of the hands would go up. Blockchain. This is the next internet. We've had the internet of information. We're getting the internet of value. And when you get a paradigm shift like this, you get a crisis of leadership. What's your role going to be in leading us towards this new period? We hope you enjoy the book. Congratulations on being the first people to get it. Thank you.